Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I am delighted to welcome a communications expert from Colorado, USA, Cindy Skalicky. Cindy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashutosh. It's very nice to be here with you.
Thank you. Cindy is the founder of On Point Communications LLC. She's a professional speaker and author. She's training F250 leaders in science and technology, and she's got a forthcoming book. And all of you know I'm very partial to authors. She's got a forthcoming book which is titled Red Light, Green Light: How to Master Your Message in Innovation and Business. So, Cindy, before we talk communications, tell me a little bit about your own journey.
Absolutely. I would love to. It's a very winding and unexpected journey.
Mhm.
The honest truth is that I never intended to start a business, never mind one that was going to be so well received by innovators all over the world. So it's a fun story to tell. I'm originally from the Chicagoland area in the Midwest, and I have 2 degrees in something called rhetoric or rhetorical theory.
Wow.
And I have an undergraduate and a master's degree. And people are usually asking, like, what in the world is that? Well, rhetoric is the science and art of persuasion.
Mm.
And we might get a chance to talk more about that later.
Yep.
But ultimately, I started my early career in global advertising with BBDO Chicago, and I worked on a number of clients, including pharma. I was on the pitch team that won the first ever .com client in the
Wow.
year 2000. So
Mm.
it was called ethnicgrocer.com. It did
Right.
not survive, but
Mm.
what a lesson in innovation and startup culture for me. It was really
Mm.
rewarding.
Mm.
Then I moved on to work in the field of public relations
Mhm.
and provided services in a really niche PR firm that only serviced healthcare clients.
Mhm.
So we only worked with pharma and maybe some nonprofits like the American Diabetes
Mhm.
Association. And I sharpened my stick on scientific storytelling. And that's ultimately a lot of what we do at On Point Communications. Our
Mm.
focus is on working with leaders in science, technology, and
Right.
innovation to help them strengthen and get better at those complex
Mm.
messages that can be really tricky to disseminate.
Very well.
So I took a big break in between all of that. We have 4 children that we are raising ages 15 to 21, and On Point Communications was born just over 9 years ago. And it's been an incredible journey, and it's still going.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing this. But
Sure.
your response on uh, teaching or coaching people on communication is an interesting segue to my next question. Why do you think executive communication skills are often neglected in traditional corporate training?
Well, Ashutosh, you might know the answer to this too, and our listeners might as well. But every time someone applies for a job,
Mm.
the first thing they are supposed to kind of check the box for mentally is must have excellent communication skills,
Yes.
both written and
Yes.
oral.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So the answer to your question in my mind, based on my experiences, is that most companies expect that people have these skills already.
Mm. Mm.
They want them, they expect them, they feel that people should bring them automatically.
Mm.
Guess what? They don't.
Mm.
So frequently, the client bases that we work with who are, high level executives who
Mhm.
have been around the block for 10, 15 years by the time I work with them, the last time they had training in communications or presentation skills was a minimum of 5 years before
Mm.
I had a chance to talk with them, and
Yep.
some
Mm.
since high school. So, I think it's a big gaping hole that I'm happy to fill, and more companies are realizing the importance of this skill
Mm.
set,
Mm.
and that's a start in the right direction.
Absolutely. And what, in your view, are some of these overlooked skills in
Mm,
communication that you help
sure.
them with?
There are three that really come racing to the front of my mind.
Mm-hmm.
One has to do with overall confidence
Mm.
in the act of communicating.
Yeah.
A lot of people aren't aware of how loud nonverbal communication is.
Correct.
So we think so hard about the message we need to share, the PowerPoint presentation that we are presenting and collecting, but most of our communication, some argue 70% or more, has to do with our nonverbal communication, what we don't say, but what we show. And these are facial expressions, tone of voice. So there are, I'll educate the audience slightly here. There's verbal communication and there's nonverbal
True.
communication. Well, underneath nonverbal communication is a subset of
Mm.
communication called paraverbal communication.
Mm-hmm.
And paraverbal communication is 100% related to your voice.
Mm.
So it's tone, pitch, volume, pacing, quality of the warmth. And so
Mm.
this whole area is just one of the three that I would suggest are lacking.
Mm.
The other two are storytelling.
Mm.
Definitely, we have a lot of ground to cover when it
Yeah.
comes to how to develop a story. What stories do I even have is a
Mm.
common question. What's the function of the story in my argument or presentation? And the third is around running meetings, if you can believe it. I started to add a new module to the end. It's called the anatomy of a meeting. Like, what actually are we supposed to accomplish in a 30-minute meeting? What are its parts? Just like a hand or a foot, a meeting has parts. And if we don't think ahead about those, we waste a lot of time in meetings that should be more efficient. So
Yeah.
those are three off the top
Yeah.
of my
Yeah.
head.
Very
There's
well
many.
said. No, and these are amazing pointers that you've given to us. The other question that I wanted to ask you based on what I was reading about you is on messaging. And I
Mhm.
was fascinated to see that there is a difference that you perceive in the change in messaging for leaders communicating upwards to
Mhm.
boards and
Mhm.
downwards to teams. Tell me about
Yes.
this a little bit.
I love that question. And it's a nuance,
Mm.
right? When we work with leaders, in fact, one of my recent experiences with a team was one of our proudest results from this past year. We had worked with a team communicating upward to
Mm.
a big public board of 14 individuals. And this team needed to create the sense of trust amongst the board members that this team who was creating this vision, like, we've got this,
Mm.
board members. We understand what we're doing. You can trust us to take this vision forward. So that's different than the message that goes down to their teams. Like, let's just take these same four individuals who had to create this message. When they talk downward to their teams, they need to create that trust, but also model good communication skills and be trustworthy and help them with feedback and understanding how to encourage and be supportive in the journeys of their team members. They have to be excellent
Yeah.
listeners. They have to be um, coaches and like almost like therapists. I don't want to use
Mm.
that word, but I just did.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Mm.
it's true, though. I was just on the phone today with someone who
Mm.
was coaching up some younger folks in the business, and it's really, the expectation that they need to wear the hat of how to help people with their emotional
Mm.
intelligence and with the things that they're dealing with
Yeah.
on a day-to-day
Yeah.
basis.
Well said. Well said.
So, I'll wrap that up by saying that when I ask leaders, whether they're speaking upward or down, the first two questions I ask when we're going to create a message is the same. I say to them, before we even start to construct this message, let's think about the end. When it's all said and done, and you have turned off your Zoom meeting or you've left the room
Mm-hmm.
and people are finished, what do you hope your audience thinks about you as a
Mm.
leader?
Yeah.
And what do you hope they think about your message and what you hope they will do with it?
Mm.
And those are different. Like, you want people to think of you as a leader who's confident, trustworthy, experienced and expert level. What do you want them to think about your message? That it was smooth, articulate, clear, easy to decide about, right? And you want them to be motivated,
Mm.
inspired by your
Yeah.
message.
Yeah.
So we decide these two things, and then we back out the message to do the best job we can to hit those
Mm.
by the end.
Great response. Cindy, a few minutes back, you also spoke about storytelling as an important skill that is
Mhm.
needed.
Heck
How
yeah.
can we, how can storytelling be used in times of change or crises, especially to foster trust and cohesion?
Oh, story is magnificently powerful.
Yeah.
I think people know that on the surface, but
Mm.
I will drop you a data point for all those who like numbers. There is plenty of research in the annals of research with regard to story that story is 22 times more powerful than a
Wow.
piece of data.
Mm.
So, have you heard that before,
No, I
Ashutosh?
haven't. This is,
No?
no,
Okay. Well, I'm glad to bring something new to you. Yes,
absolutely.
storytelling is 22 times more powerful than dropping a fact.
Wow.
And there is, so like we have to ask ourselves, why is that? And what would
Mm.
be the help of a story in a time of change?
Mm.
Well, story helps us feel. Story invites us to participate with the speaker
Mhm.
in another experience that is outside of the one that we are in.
Mm.
There is extreme power in transplanting a person,
Mm.
mind, body, and spirit into a different place and time.
Mm.
And that can engage different parts of their brains and it can calm them down. So you asked about change, right? And this project that I just finished helping these leaders on
Mm.
when they presented to the board, our main task was to craft a powerful storyline.
Right.
So when we did that, the part of the purpose was to bring people to a place where they could imagine more, they could envision long-term growth
Mm.
and see what was ahead when we take this big change, which was exactly what this team was doing, was a
Mm.
huge
Yeah.
change.
Yeah.
So story is, I'll give you an example
Mhm.
if you would allow me to.
Absolutely. Please.
Um, I have a president of a real estate conglomerate that I've been working with for about 18 months.
Mhm.
And she said, Cindy, I have to go bring two groups of people together and tie up this half-day workshop that we are conducting. These
Mm.
two groups of people, they don't meet very often and they're in two different cities. So it's kind of uncomfortable and we're doing something new. We're doing a change. She said, how do I wrap this up with something exciting? We are like bankers and math people and analytic thinkers, and
Mhm.
they're going to be receiving dry content all day long.
Yeah.
So I said, well, let's go back to your passion piece exercise, which is something that I conduct with her, and let's see
Mm.
what came up in there.
Mm.
Long story short, we told this storyline about a lamplighter. She describes herself as a lamplighter, and
Mm.
Ashutosh, the lamplighter is a person who lights lamps between cities.
Mhm.
And harkened back to Mary Poppins
Mhm.
and the character Dick Van
Yeah.
Dyke, who at the
Mm.
very beginning of the film wakes up the city of London by lighting lamps.
Correct.
She used that storyline
Mm.
and we showed a picture of Dick Van Dyke in the movie lighting lamps to say, today we've brought two cities together.
Mm.
We've lit lamps. We're going to keep lighting these lamps.
Mm.
This is going to generate more light
Yeah.
for our brand, all the things. And it's just like 90 seconds that a story sometimes needs to be
Absolutely.
told.
What a great response. Thank you so much. That's an amazing
Yeah,
story. So now, Cindy, I want to move to the next segment, which is relating to rhetoric, persuasive theory, and storytelling.
sure.
How would you define persuasive theory and why is it critical for leaders today?
Absolutely. Well, Aristotle is the father of rhetoric.
Yeah.
He's the father of persuasion. And I will just tell you his definition of rhetoric because
Mhm.
it's the one that I lean on most heavily. He's who I studied. And he would say, of the modes of persuasion furnished by the spoken word, there are three kinds. The first depends on the personal character of the speaker. That's you. The second on the audience and putting them in a certain frame of mind. And the third on the proof provided by the words of the speech itself. So in that definition, we have
Mm,
three parts and we have a picture of a triangle.
mm,
We have speaker, we have audience, we have message.
mm.
That's ethos or credibility, that's pathos or heart, and that's logos or logic, reason, the argument, like the why, the proof, right? So Aristotle argues, and I say this to clients too, we have to balance the three parts of that
Mm.
triangle with real precision and forethought in order to have what he would call an effective rhetorical act.
Wow.
So rhetoric is the it's the foundation of all messaging.
Mm,
Everyone, every single day, is relying on rhetorical theory, but they usually don't know it
mm,
or know what it's called.
mm.
So I kind of light up that part of their brain to teach them those three tools and help them strengthen their muscles with it so they can use it with more intention.
Well said. And based on the work that you do, what are some of the common obstacles you have seen leaders facing in adopting persuasive techniques?
How much time do you have?
Yes.
No,
You
well,
could
as I
write your
said
next book
earlier,
on that, I'm sure,
I
but
know, right? No, and I say that in with love in my heart because it
yeah.
is my true passion and vision and mission to help
Mm,
people really improve these skills. And so a couple of things that come to mind, especially for leaders who are in science and technology and who are getting along in their career and really want to move up. A couple of things. The biggest thing is that most speakers, and this is true in any industry, they really struggle with they struggle to stop being them
mm,
when they create their message
mm,
and instead sit in the chairs of their audience.
mm,
What I mean by that is I'll say, Ashutosh, I don't really care what
mm,
you want to say to your audience.
mm,
And they go, oh my gosh, what do you mean, Cindy?
mm.
And I say, hold on. What I want to know is what does your audience need to
Correct.
hear from
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
in order to be moved to action?
Mm,
So often we start presentations with what we want to tell. I
mhm,
know all this stuff. I need to prove that I know it. I'm an expert. I'm going to show them. No. We need to sit and think about where your audience is in relationship to your idea.
mm.
What do they even know
Yeah.
about aeronautics? Do they even know what the word means? Because sometimes we have to start there.
Mm, mm,
So, really having the strength to stop being you and start being them just for the portion of time you're building the message. I mean, that's the number one thing
mm,
that we have to really pull apart. And that's the essence of the book. That's the
mm,
point of the
mm.
book being written is to teach people how to do that.
Yeah. And I'm going to come to your book
Yeah, no,
in a
that's
few
okay.
questions. But my
Sure.
next question for you, Cindy, is how does persuasive theory intersect with neurological studies for decision making when it comes to your own training?
Hmm. Let me ask you to say that in a new way. Your
So,
question.
my
Tell me
question
that
is,
again. Yeah.
um, how does persuasive theory
Yeah.
intersect with neurological studies?
Oh, neurological. Yes. I was hoping that that's what the word was that I heard you
Mm,
say. Yes, it has a huge area of overlap.
mm,
And I learned this the longer that I began to do this work.
mm.
Ultimately, neurologically speaking, we are really in the business of changing behavior.
Correct.
So, neurologically, we have to change the way your brain is operating.
Mm,
Think about how people often will start with so
yeah.
filler words that are very common.
Mm,
Those are habits that have been laid for decades inside of a person's brain. And so to reverse that requires a lot of attention, awareness, and practice. So, with all of the skills that we teach, I cannot promise that someone's going to suddenly become this amazing
right.
speaker. I just can't do that. We are doing change in behavior, and that has to do with your brain. So a lot of the rehearsal techniques that we teach, for example, rely heavily on your ability to retrain the neurological pathways of your brain and give your brain new food to consume that helps your habits become new.
Well said. I have time for two more questions.
Sure.
My next question is, and I want to come back to storytelling because there is such an important aspect of all leaders' lives, and you have a lot of expertise in this area. Cindy, what are some of the main elements that make a story compelling and memorable?
Some of the main, that's a great question. And I just love helping people see the stories in their lives that they can use to bring into business presentations.
Mm,
The elements of story that are required,
mm,
one of them has to do with getting into the heart level. I mean, story gets us to heart level, right? That's the whole point of
yeah.
story. But
Mm,
stories that are good are specific stories.
mm,
So a sticky story is a story that has specificity. And I was just helping a client last week on how to tell the story of being at a Disneyland um, parade with his kids. He
mhm,
was talking about leadership and how he sometimes picks his kids up so that when they're in the parade, they can see at his level.
yeah.
And sometimes he gets down to the kids' level. And we talked about how in that little storyline, adding small things like the date of his visit to Disneyland, the character that he saw in the distance, the
Mm,
music that was playing. It was a small, small world. Some of the sticky parts of story,
mm,
that's what grabs people's attention to make it memorable.
mm,
So when you talk about being memorable and how a story can help achieve that, the data shows that only about 10% of the message leaders deliver is
mm,
what's actually remembered by
mm,
the audience.
mm,
So once again, beginning with the end in mind, when it comes to a story, we think, okay, well, what's the 10% message that you hope your leaders in the audience leave with?
mhm,
It's like, well, I hope they remember the Disneyland parade story.
mm.
Well, great. Then we better repeat that a few times. We better tell it in a couple of different ways. We better plant it throughout because we have to hear it multiple times in
Right.
order for it to be memorable. So story is it's like a mustard seed that provides this incredible growth in our minds.
Mm,
Because if someone will just remember Disneyland, they will be able to remember all the rest of the
right.
leaves and branches on the trees if you've
Mm,
done a really good job
yeah.
bringing them into that moment.
Mm.
And that's the
What a great
power of
response.
story.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What a great response. Thank you. And my last question for you, Cindy, and this is about your forthcoming book, Red
Mhm.
Light, Green Light, How to Master Your Message in Innovation Business. Tell me about your book and what has been your hypothesis when you wrote this book?
Oh, yes. Great question. The premise of the book and the reason for the red light, green light is that ultimately, when we stand up in front of an audience of any
Mm,
kind, we can think of ourselves as a red blinking light of risk to that audience.
right.
They don't know us, they don't understand what we're going to bring to the table, they don't maybe believe our expertise is
Mm,
authentic, and they're risk averse. And
mm,
so what we have to do is diffuse that and help our audiences go from the red light of risk through the yellow light of maybe to that green light of go. And so how do we do that? Well, we have to lay out story. We have to anchor it in rhetorical theory, and we teach the how-to model, which
mm,
is what the book is about. But why did I create it? I'll tell you. And it was unexpected.
mm,
I was watching over and over and over again. I was watching founders who are new entrepreneurs pitch their business to investors. That's kind of how I got my start at On
right.
Point before we started to work with
Mm,
corporate.
mm,
I was watching founders do their 5-minute pitches over and over, and they kept skipping
mm,
the part of the pitch that would help their audience really understand what it was they were
right.
bringing to the table. And they were making assumptions about what their audience knew, and they were
Mm,
skipping the element of story. They were
Right.
not correctly or adequately orienting the audience to exactly what it is they were trying to change because they thought their audience already knew, and they didn't. And so the prevailing answer kept being investor raises their hand. I don't totally get what you're
Mm.
trying to change in the
Yeah.
industry. I
Yeah.
don't really get it. And if we can avoid the I don't really get it,
Mm.
we are
Absolutely.
on our way to success, right?
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, the book has started with that kind of kernel, and then now we've taken it to corporate environments at Google and DuPont and Microsoft and big brands that have now learned this model with success, and it's been just really rewarding to see people grow and thrive with it.
Wow. And when do you expect the book to come out?
We are looking at end of Q1 next year, probably March, maybe April, depending
Yeah.
on how we do with our editing of the
Yeah.
manuscript, which is in process right now.
Well, good luck with your book. And once your book is out, do send me a message. We'll do a separate podcast to
Thank
chat
you.
about your book.
I would
But
love that.
but on that note, Cindy, thank you so much for speaking to me about your own incredible journey. You know, I learned many new things from you on communication. Your three overlooked skills on communication are so important. I loved your story about the lighting lamps, and the message
Mhm.
that's come out so loud and clear in your conversation with me
Oh, good.
is the importance of storytelling, and I didn't
Mhm.
know this data, but storytelling is 22 times more powerful than data, is what you told all of us. Thank you
Yep.
also for talking to me about persuasive theory and rhetoric. Thank you again
Mhm.
for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Ashutosh, thank you so much for meeting all of us where we are in our journeys and letting us share our passions. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.